The lonely desert. The sun blazed high above the vast, empty desert. The wind blew fiercely, stirring up the golden sand, making it feel like the very earth itself was alive and angry. In the middle of this desolation, a lone figure trudged forward. Her steps were slow, heavy, each one sinking slightly into the hot sand beneath her feet. She was tired, so tired. Her body ached, and her throat burned from the dryness of the desert air. She had been walking for what felt like days, with no destination in mind. There was only the endless stretch of sand, and the silence, which was louder than anything else. Her name was Lyra, and she had been abandoned. She had once known the comfort of home, of family, of a place where she belonged. But those days were far behind her now. Her heart had been shattered, and her spirit, once full of hope, had been crushed under the weight of the loneliness she carried. She had no one left, no one to turn to. The people she had trusted had left her behind, like a discarded piece of trash. The sun was beginning to set, casting a fiery orange glow across the sky. But Lyra had no energy to appreciate the beauty of the moment. She barely noticed the change in the sky as her eyes remained fixed on the ground ahead. She had no plan, no reason to go anywhere. She just walked, one step after another, hoping that somehow, somewhere she would find relief from the emptiness that surrounded her. As her feet sank deeper into the sand with each step, Lyra stumbled and fell, her body too weak to keep going. She collapsed onto the warm ground, the sand sticking to her skin. She closed her eyes, feeling the hot wind against her face, and for a moment, she thought about giving up. What was the point of going on? What was the point of living when everything she had once known was gone? But then, as she lay there, the sound of footsteps reached her ears. At first, she thought it was just the wind playing tricks on her, but then the sound grew louder, closer. Her heart skipped a beat. She pushed herself up, her hands shaking as she wiped the sand from her face. She blinked, trying to focus on the shape in the distance. A figure, a human, was walking toward her. At first she thought she might be imagining it, but no. There was a man, a real man, walking through the desert towards her. His silhouette was framed by the setting sun, and for a brief moment, he looked like a mirage. But the closer he got, the more real he seemed. Lyra's heart raced as she pushed herself to her feet. Could it really be? Was he someone who could help her, or was he just another stranger passing through, ignoring her pain like the rest of the world had? But even in her exhaustion, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could be different. The man stopped a few feet away, and Lyra took a step back, unsure of what to do. He was tall, with short brown hair and a rugged face, his clothes dusty from the desert. His eyes were kind, though, as he looked at her with a gentle expression, his voice soft as he spoke. "Are you all right?" he asked. Lyra opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was too tired, too thirsty, too lost in the desert to form a sentence. But the man didn't seem to mind. He stepped closer, his voice full of concern. "You're not alone anymore," he said, reaching out a hand. "I'll help you." The kindness in his voice was unexpected, and for a moment, Lyra simply stared at him, unsure if she could trust him. She had been let down too many times before, and now, after everything she had been through, how could she trust anyone? But something in his eyes told her he meant what he said. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't here to take advantage of her or hurt her. No, this man was offering help, offering a chance to escape the desert's suffocating grip. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra felt a small spark of hope inside her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't known in a long time, a feeling she had almost forgotten existed. Could this man really help her? Could he be the answer to all the questions that had been haunting her mind? The man didn't wait for her to answer. He simply turned and began walking, motioning for her to follow. "Come on," he said, his tone steady and reassuring. I'll take you somewhere safe." Lyra hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether she should trust him. But then, looking at the vast, empty desert around her, she realized she had no other choice. She had been alone for so long, and the desert had shown her nothing but pain and suffering. Maybe this man was the change she needed, the chance she had been waiting for. With a deep breath, Lyra began to follow him, each step feeling a little easier than the last. As she walked beside him, the desert didn't seem as terrifying. The loneliness didn't feel as crushing. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that there was still hope. Little did she know, the man wasn't just offering her a place to rest. He was offering her something far more valuable, an opportunity to rebuild, to find a new life, to finally feel like she mattered again. And in that moment, as they walked through the desert together, Lyra couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. The journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Lyra believed she was no longer walking alone. The stranger's offer, the desert stretched endlessly behind them, a vast expanse of sand and emptiness. But as Lyra followed the man, the oppressive weight of solitude that had weighed down on her for so long seemed to lift, even if just a little. With each step, the cold night air began to settle in, the sun finally sinking below the horizon. The sky above them turned a deep shade of violet, with stars beginning to twinkle faintly in the distance. The man, whose name she had yet to learn, walked ahead without saying much, his steps steady and confident. Lyra kept her distance, still unsure of his intentions. She had been through too much to trust anyone easily, and yet, something about him made her feel like she could take the chance. There was no rush, no immediate danger in his presence. His actions so far had been nothing but kind. But kindness, she knew, could sometimes hide darker intentions. They walked for what felt like hours, the coolness of the night seeping through Lyra's worn clothes, but she was too tired to protest. Eventually, the man stopped at the edge of a small valley, hidden from view by the surrounding rocks. It was a secluded spot, far away from the path she had been walking, and Lyra's instincts told her this was where he had planned to take her all along. The man turned to face her, his expression serious, but his eyes were still gentle. "This is where I've been staying," he said, motioning to the area around them. "It's safe here, for now." Lyra glanced around, noting the small stone structures that blended into the landscape, carefully built into the natural curves of the valley. The place seemed quiet, almost peaceful, but something felt off. There was an unsettling stillness to the air, a reminder that trust had to be earned, not freely given. "Why are you helping me?" Lyra asked, her voice soft but steady, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What do you want in return?" The man's lips curled into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He sighed, almost as if he'd been expecting this question. "I don't want anything from you," he replied simply. "I'm not here to make any deals. I just want to help. It's what I do." Lyra frowned. She had heard those words before, from people who claimed to be helpful, only to turn their backs when the time came. She was no fool. "Everyone always wants something," she said, almost to herself, her voice tinged with bitterness. "You're the first person who hasn't asked for something in return. But I don't know if I can believe you." The man nodded slowly, as if he understood the weight of her words. He sat down on a flat rock and motioned for her to join him. "I don't blame you for being cautious. You've been through a lot, I'm sure," he said quietly, his voice soft but firm. "But let me tell you something. I wasn't always this way. I was lost, just like you, once upon a time." Lyra hesitated, but sat down beside him. The stones around them were cool, their surface smooth and worn by years of desert winds. For the first time since they met, she allowed herself to feel a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something. The man looked up at the stars, his gaze distant. "I didn't start out wanting to be a protector," he continued, his voice tinged with a sadness Lyra hadn't expected. I had my own demons, my own mistakes. But when you're on your own, when you've lost everything, you learn to survive. You learn to care for others, not because you have to, but because you want to. You want to build something worth saving. Lyra listened intently, her heart tightening in her chest. His words hit harder than she expected, stirring up feelings she thought she had buried long ago. For the first time in ages, she felt like someone truly understood her pain, her loneliness. So what now? Lyra asked quietly. Are you going to keep me here? Are you going to build me a home out of stone like you said? The man's eyes met hers, his expression soft but resolute. That's exactly what I'm going to do, he said, his tone steady and unwavering. But it won't just be a shelter. It will be more than that. It'll be a home, a place where you can rebuild, a place where you can feel safe again. Lyra studied him closely, trying to read the sincerity in his words. There was something about his calm demeanor that made her believe him. Maybe it was his conviction, or maybe it was the way he seemed to understand the depth of her pain without needing to ask. Why stone? She asked, her curiosity piqued. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Stone is permanent, he explained. It doesn't fade, it doesn't crumble easily. When you build with stone, you're building something that lasts. And that's what I want for you, something that lasts, something you can rely on. Lyra's heart stirred. The idea of building a future with something so strong, so unyielding, made her feel a flicker of hope. Maybe it was possible after all. To start over. Maybe this man, this stranger, was offering her a chance to rebuild not just her life, but herself. She looked at him, her eyes softening. Okay, she said, the words almost a whisper, I'll trust you. The man smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. Good, he said, standing up and offering his hand. We've got a lot of work to do. Lyra took his hand, feeling the warmth of his grip. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like the beginning of something important. Something that might finally make her believe in the possibility of a future. Together, they walked toward the stone structures in the distance, the desert fading behind them as they stepped into the unknown. For the first time in a long time, Lyra wasn't afraid. Building trust, the following days felt like a strange, quiet kind of magic, where the world around Lyra slowly transformed into something she could almost believe in again. The desert no longer seemed endless and cruel. The land beneath her feet was no longer a place of suffering. It had become the beginning of something new, something that could heal the wounds of her soul. Each morning, the man whose name was Gareth worked tirelessly, chipping away at the stone, carving it into the foundation of the shelter. His movements were calm, methodical, like he had done this 1,000 times before. Lyra would watch him from a distance. At first, unsure of where to fit in, unsure of what her role could possibly be in this strange, quiet partnership. He didn't ask her to work, but he didn't refuse when she offered either. He just smiled at her, his eyes full of quiet understanding, as if he knew that rebuilding trust didn't happen overnight. She started small, gathering stones, helping him shape the walls with her bare hands, feeling the cold, rough surfaces of the rock beneath her fingers. It was hard work, but it was honest work. It felt good to do something again, something that had purpose. At night, they sat together by a small fire, eating the simple meals Gareth had prepared, both of them listening to the soft wind of the desert. They didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was comforting in its own way, like two people who had been through the worst of things and now found peace in shared, quiet moments. There was something about the way Gareth worked that made Lyra feel safe. He never rushed, never pressured her, and in his steadiness, she found a calm that had been missing from her life for far too long. His quiet strength reminded her of something she had forgotten, the beauty in simplicity, in working towards something with your own hands, in building from the ground up. But as the days passed, A part of her began to wonder, why was he doing all of this for her? Why was he so determined to help someone like her, someone with nothing to give? She had known people who helped for the sake of obligation or to gain something in return. She couldn't figure him out. He hadn't once asked for anything in return. Not for money, not for gratitude, just her trust, and maybe a little piece of her heart. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Lyra couldn't hold back her curiosity anymore. She had to know more. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice soft, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "What do you get out of all this? You don't owe me anything." Gareth paused, his eyes fixed on the flames, the soft crackling of the fire filling the air. It was a long moment before he spoke. And when he did, his words were measured, like he was carefully choosing each one. "I've been where you are," he said quietly, his voice tinged with something deep, something unspoken. "I've been lost, abandoned. I've had everything taken from me, my family, my home, my purpose. I've been the one wandering in the desert, with nothing but my thoughts and the hope that maybe someday someone would help me." Lyra stayed silent, listening closely. There was a rawness in his words, something that struck a chord deep inside her. She had never known someone like him, someone who could speak so openly about their pain, yet still offer kindness to others. Gareth continued, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "When I was in that place, a stranger came to me. He didn't ask for anything, he didn't even know my name, but he gave me something. He gave me the chance to rebuild, to find myself again. That's why I'm doing this for you. I know what it's like to feel like you've lost everything. And I know what it feels like when someone gives you a chance to start over." Lyra looked at him, her heart heavy with emotion. She hadn't expected him to open up like this, to share something so personal, something that made him more human, more real. In that moment, the wall she had carefully built around herself began to crack just a little. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I'm not worth all this effort." But Gareth shook his head, the flickering light of the fire casting shadows on his face. "Everyone is worth something, Lyra. You just have to let yourself believe." That again. The warmth of the fire seemed to match the warmth spreading inside her, a small spark of hope that had been buried for so long. She hadn't realized it until now, but she had been waiting for someone to show her that she mattered. Waiting for someone to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken beyond repair. As the night grew deeper, they sat together, the fire crackling softly between them. Lyra didn't speak again. She didn't need to. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a trust that was beginning to grow. The stone shelter was far from finished, but the foundation had been laid, not just in the ground, but in the hearts of two people who had both been lost and found in each other's company. Lyra didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid to find out. In Gareth, she saw something she hadn't seen in herself for years, a chance to rebuild, a chance to start over. And she realized that, just like the shelter they were building, her life too could be made strong again, one stone at a time. The stone shelter take shape. The days were growing longer as the stone shelter began to take form, rising from the desert ground like a quiet testament to their shared labor. What had once been a scattered collection of rocks and dust now stood as something more, a place that could one day be a home. The walls grew taller with each passing day, sturdy and unyielding against the unforgiving desert winds. It was simple, yet beautiful in its own way, an offering of permanence in a world that had shown Lyra nothing but uncertainty. Lyra had never seen a structure like this before. It wasn't the type of house she had imagined in her childhood, with walls lined with soft blankets and a warm fireplace inside. But there was something about the stone walls that made her feel grounded, as if they were whispering a promise to her. This could be her new beginning, if only she had the courage to believe in it. Each morning, Lyra woke to the sound of Gareth working. His focus never wavered as he chipped away at the stone, his hands steady and confident, like he was carving out a future with each piece. He never rushed, never seemed to tire, and the way he worked with the stone was almost as if he was building something for himself as much as for her. For the first time, Lyra felt a sense of belonging. She could almost feel the weight of the stone walls against her back, as though they were offering her protection, stability, things she had never known. Despite her growing appreciation for the work, there were moments when Lyra found herself staring at Gareth, wondering if this was all just a dream. Was it really possible that someone who had once been as lost as her could have such unwavering faith? The kindness he showed her, the trust he placed in her, made her question her own worth. One evening, after another long day of building, Lyra couldn't hold back the questions any longer. They were sitting by the fire, the warmth of the flames the only light in the quiet desert night. Gareth had just finished carving the last stone for the day, and Lyra had been watching him, her mind racing with thoughts she had kept hidden for too long. "You never talk about yourself," she said, her voice hesitant. "You tell me about the stone, about the shelter, but you never tell me anything about ... you. What happened to you?" Gareth looked at her, his face unreadable for a moment. The firelight flickered in his eyes, casting deep shadows on his features. He seemed to weigh the question carefully, as if deciding how much to reveal. "It's not about me," he said softly, his voice steady but distant. "It never was," Lyra furrowed her brow. "But you're here. You're the one helping me. Don't I deserve to know?" For a long while, Gareth didn't speak. The silence between them felt heavy, but Lyra didn't back down. She needed to understand. Needed to know why this man, who had every reason to turn away from the world, had chosen to help her. Finally, Gareth stood up and walked toward the stone shelter, his silhouette dark against the faint light of the fire. He rested his hand on the stone wall, feeling its cool surface, before turning back to her. "When I was younger," he began, his voice quieter now, "I had a family. A place that I thought was safe, that I thought was permanent. But things change. People change." He paused, his eyes distant, as if seeing something far beyond the firelight. "I lost everything, my family, my home. I was just like you, Lyra. Alone, abandoned, walking through a desert without any idea of where I was going." Lyra felt a pang of understanding as she listened to him. His story was one she knew all too well. "But you didn't give up," she said softly. "You rebuilt? Why? How?" Gareth turned back toward her, his expression softer now, the hardness in his eyes replaced by something that resembled sorrow and resolve. "Because I learned something," he said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet force. "When you've lost everything, you find out what really matters. You find the strength you didn't know you had, and you build, even when you think you can't. You build, not just for yourself, but for the people who need it. For the people who can't do it on their own." Lyra watched him, her heart tightening as his words sank in. She had always thought of herself as weak, as someone who had nothing left to give. But the way Gareth spoke about strength, about rebuilding, made her wonder if she could too. "So that's why you're doing this?" she asked, her voice small, but curious. "Because you want to help me rebuild?" Gareth nodded, but there was something deeper in his gaze, something that made Lyra's heart race. "Because I see in you what I saw in myself all those years ago," he said quietly. "A person who has been broken, who has been abandoned, but who still has the ability to rise again. You just need to trust that you can." Lyra sat back, her mind racing with the weight of his words. Trust. It was something she had lost long ago. But maybe, just maybe, she could begin to trust again. Gareth wasn't asking for anything from her, not anything she couldn't give. He wasn't asking for her to change overnight, just to believe that she had the strength to rebuild, to start again. The stone shelter stood tall behind them, the walls solid and firm, a testament to the work they had done together. But it was more than that. It was a symbol of something bigger, something Lyra was just beginning to understand. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to have it all figured out. She just had to trust that, little by little, she could rebuild her life, stone by stone. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as broken as she had thought. The past revealed the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the desert as Lyra and Gareth sat by the fire. The stone shelter, now half completed, stood behind them, its unfinished walls casting faint outlines against the fading light. The night had grown cooler, but the warmth of the fire flickered brightly, reflecting in the quiet stillness between them. It had been several weeks since they had first met, and although the work had continued day after day, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Gareth had been kind, patient, and steadfast in his mission to help her rebuild, but there was a part of him that remained distant, a part of him that he kept hidden, locked away in the corners of his mind. And as much as Lyra wanted to believe in the sanctuary they were creating together, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there were things he hadn't shared with her. She had seen glimpses of his past, the quiet sorrow in his eyes when he spoke of loss, the way his hands tightened when he touched certain stones. But he never spoke about it directly, always changing the subject when she asked. The walls he had built, both in the shelter and in his heart, were not yet ready to crumble. Tonight, however, something was different. There was a restlessness in the air, a sense that the secrets Gareth had been keeping were ready to surface. Lyra sat cross-legged by the fire, watching the flames dance as they crackled in the desert night. She couldn't keep her questions locked inside any longer. The trust she had placed in him deserved an answer. She had to know more. "Gareth," she began softly, her voice careful but firm, "you've told me so much about the shelter, about how we're building something strong, something lasting. But ... What about you? What's your story?" He didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on the fire, his jaw set in that familiar quiet way that always made Lyra wonder what he was thinking. She saw the muscles in his face tighten, the flicker of hesitation in his eyes, but this time, she didn't look away. She couldn't. After what felt like an eternity, Gareth let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging slightly as if the weight of his unspoken past was pressing down on him more than ever. "You're right," he said quietly. "I've avoided telling you about my past. Not because I don't trust you, but because ... Well, it's not easy to talk about, not when it's still fresh." Lyra remained silent, giving him space to speak, her heart pounding as she waited for the truth to finally surface. "I wasn't always like this," Gareth continued, his voice low. "I didn't start out in the desert, and I didn't come here to build homes for people. I had a family, a life. I had everything I thought I needed." His voice wavered slightly, but he steadied himself before continuing. "But life has a way of stripping everything away from you when you least expect it." He paused, his fingers fiddling with the edge of a stone, the same stone he had used to build the walls that now surrounded them. Lyra could see the weight of his words hanging in the air, the painful memories he was trying to push through. "My family was taken from me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't an accident. It wasn't some random event. They were taken from me by people who didn't care about anything except their own gain. People who didn't care who they hurt. It was all about power, control, and money." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. She had known Gareth had been through something terrible, but she hadn't realized just how deep the scars ran. "I tried to fight back," Gareth continued, his voice hardening with the memory. "I tried to save them. But in the end, I was just another victim. I lost them all. My wife, my son. They were gone, taken by people who thought they had the right to decide who lived and who didn't." His eyes turned away from the fire, his gaze distant, lost in a memory only he could see. "I've never been the same since. I couldn't go back to who I was before. There was nothing left of the person I used to be. Lyra's heart ached as she listened, her thoughts swirling with a mix of compassion and disbelief. She had never heard anyone speak of such loss with such rawness, such vulnerability. And yet, there he was, still standing before her, still offering his strength, still building something from the ashes of his past. She reached out and placed a hand on his arm, gently offering him the comfort that words couldn't. "I'm sorry, Gareth. I didn't know ... He nodded, his expression softening as he glanced down at her hand. "You don't need to apologize, Lyra. It's not your fault. I don't talk about this because I don't want pity. I want to build something better, something that can last longer than all the pain I've been through." He turned back to the shelter, his eyes filled with determination. "That's why I'm here. I want to help you rebuild, just like I'm rebuilding myself. It's not about forgetting the past. It's about learning how to live with it and still move forward." Lyra let his words sink in, understanding now why he had been so committed to helping her. His actions, his dedication, had come from a place of deep loss, but also deep resilience. He wasn't just building a shelter for her, he was building it for both of them. A place where they could heal, a place where they could finally find peace. "I'll help you," Lyra said softly, her voice steady with newfound resolve. "I'll help you build this. We can rebuild together." For the first time, Gareth looked at her with something other than the quiet determination that had defined him. There was a flicker of gratitude in his eyes, a recognition of the bond they had forged through their shared efforts. And in that moment, Lyra knew she wasn't alone anymore. They weren't alone. Together, they could rebuild not just a shelter, but their lives. The past was still with them, lingering in the shadows. But they were stronger now. Together, they would face whatever came next. A dangerous secret. The days had grown cooler, and the stone shelter, though still incomplete, stood proud against the encroaching desert. Lyra had become more involved in its construction, her hands rough from the work, but her spirit growing stronger with each stone she laid. There was a rhythm to it now, a flow in their partnership that made her feel grounded, like the desert beneath her feet had stopped being an enemy and instead became the foundation for something new, something lasting. But despite the growing sense of security, something remained, an undercurrent of tension that Lyra couldn't ignore. Gareth had been more distant lately, his usual calmness replaced with a quiet unease that seemed to cloud his every action. He still worked tirelessly, still guided her, but there were moments when his eyes grew distant, when his hands tightened around the tools, as if he were afraid of something just beyond the horizon. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Lyra couldn't ignore it any longer. Gareth had barely spoken all day, his usual warmth replaced by a coldness she had never seen before. It was as if something had changed, something she wasn't privy to, and she couldn't stand the silence any longer. "Gareth," she began, her voice steady but filled with concern. "Something's wrong. You've been ... different. What's going on?" Gareth looked at her, his expression guarded, like a man trying to keep something buried deep within. For a long moment he said nothing, only staring into the fire, his face illuminated by the dancing flames. Lyra's heart raced, knowing he was struggling with something. But she needed to know. She couldn't keep living in the dark, not anymore. "Please." "Gareth," she pressed, her voice softer now. "You've shared so much with me. I've trusted you, and I need you to trust me." At her words, Gareth's eyes flickered with something. Was it fear? Regret? The fire crackled loudly between them, filling the silence as he slowly exhaled. Then, finally he spoke. "There's something I haven't told you," he said, his voice low, almost lost in the wind. "Something I've been running from. And it's been following me, no matter where I go." Lyra's pulse quickened, the weight of his words settling heavily in her chest. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his, waiting for the rest. "The people I left behind," he continued. The ones who took everything from me, they're still out there. They're looking for me." Lyra's stomach dropped, her heart skipping a beat. "Who are they? What do they want from you?" Gareth ran, a hand through his hair, his eyes closing for a moment, as if he were trying to block out the memories. "They're not just people, Lyra. They're part of a group, a powerful one. They deal in things that most people never even know exist. They want something from me, something I took from them before I left, and now they'll do whatever it takes to get it back." Lyra's mind spun. She had always known there was more to Gareth's story than he let on, but this was darker than anything she could have imagined. The peaceful life they had begun to build together was now threatened by something far bigger, far more dangerous. "What did you take?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if the answer might change everything. He didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he stared into the fire, the flames casting shadows across his face. "I was part of it once," he said quietly. "I was a part of their operation, their business, but I didn't know how deep it went until it was too late. When I realized what they were really doing, I tried to get out. But they don't let people leave. Not easily. They're hunting me, Lyra. They'll never stop until they find me." Lyra felt a chill creep up her spine. The world she had once known so small, so confined, was suddenly bigger, more dangerous. She had trusted Gareth, believed in the quiet strength he had shown her, but now she understood the true cost of that trust. His past wasn't just something he had to run from, it was something that could tear their future apart. "You don't have to do this alone," Lyra said, her voice trembling but steady. She could feel the weight of her own fears, but she refused to let them stop her. "We'll figure this out. We can finish the shelter, finish what we started, together." Gareth shook his head slowly, his face clouded with regret. "You don't understand, Lyra," he said, his voice tight. "This isn't just about building a home. This is about survival. They won't stop until I'm dead. And anyone who gets in there, we will suffer the same fate." The fire crackled, sending sparks into the air, as if it too felt the tension between them. Lyra's mind raced, but she couldn't let herself be paralyzed by fear. She had already chosen to trust him, to believe in the possibility of a future together. But now, faced with the darkness of his past, she knew she had to make a choice, one that would define her future. "We can run," she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "We can leave this place, disappear. There's nowhere they can't find us if we stay in one place, but if we keep moving, we can stay ahead of them." Gareth's gaze softened for a moment, a flicker of hope passing through his eyes. "You don't deserve this, Lyra. I never wanted this to drag you into my fight. I wanted to protect you, not put you in danger." Lyra stood up, the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders like the desert night air. "I'm not going anywhere, Gareth. You've already given me more than anyone ever has. I'm here because I believe in what we're building, what we can be together. I won't leave you now." The two of them stood there in the silence of the desert night, the wind howling softly around them. Gareth looked at Lyra, his eyes filled with a quiet gratitude. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone. They had a choice now: run and hide, or fight and face the consequences together. Whatever they decided, they would face it as one. The shelter behind them, made of stone, stood solid and unyielding against the desert winds, a symbol of their strength and resilience. The danger may have been closer than ever, but they would face it with the same determination they had used to build their future. Together, they would stand firm. The final decision: the moon hung low over the desert, casting a pale light on the stone shelter that now stood like a silent sentinel against the vast, unforgiving landscape. Its walls were solid, strong, a symbol of the hard work and dedication that had gone into every stone, every hour spent under the blistering sun, and every moment shared between Lyra and Gareth. It was more than just a shelter, It was the promise of a new beginning, a refuge from the past, a place to heal. But as the night stretched on, a heavy sense of unease settled between them. The stillness of the desert seemed to press down on Lyra's chest, each passing second filled with the looming threat that Gareth had tried to shield her from. The danger wasn't just a distant shadow anymore. It was real, and it was closing in. Gareth stood by the fire, his silhouette flickering in the light, his face hardened with a resolve that made Lyra's heart ache. She could see it in his eyes, the struggle, the pain of knowing that the life they had begun to build was threatened by forces he could no longer outrun. He had been running for so long, hiding from his past, from the people who wanted him dead. But now there was nowhere left to hide. The choice had to be made, and it had to be made now. Lyra approached him slowly, her footsteps silent on the sand. Her heart pounded in her chest as she reached out to him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The weight of what they were about to face hung heavy in the air, but she couldn't let fear hold her back. She had come too far, and so had he. They had both found something in each other that neither thought was possible, a future. She wasn't going to let that go, not without a fight. "Gareth," she whispered, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. "We don't have to run. We don't have to be afraid of them anymore." Gareth turned to face her, his eyes searching hers, as if looking for the strength he had given her. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low, filled with a quiet desperation. "If we stay, they'll come for us. They'll come for you too. They won't stop until they have me, and anyone who stands in their way, anyone who helps me, will suffer the consequences." Lyra shook her head, refusing to back down. "I'm not afraid of them," she said firmly, "and I'm not afraid of losing you. We've built this together, Gareth. We've created something strong, something real. And I believe in that. I believe in us." The fire crackled between them, the flames reflecting the fire in her eyes, the determination that burned through every word. For the first time, Gareth saw the truth in her words. He had been afraid of bringing her into his mess, afraid of losing her before they even had a chance to truly begin. But in that moment, he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to believe until now. Lyra wasn't afraid, and she wasn't going to let him go down alone. "I've spent so long running," Gareth admitted, his voice tight with emotion. "So long hiding from my past, thinking that if I just kept moving, if I just kept building, I could escape it. But now I don't know how to stop, how to face it." Lyra took his hand in hers, the warmth of her touch grounding him, reminding him that they weren't alone anymore. "We face it together," she said softly. "We can fight, we can stand our ground. And if we have to, we'll run, but we'll do it together. Whatever happens, we do it together." Gareth's eyes softened, the weight of his past still heavy, but lighter now, as if her words had unlocked something deep inside him. She was right. He had spent so long running from his past, but he couldn't keep running forever. It was time to face it. Time to make a choice that would determine the rest of their lives. The wind picked up, sweeping the desert around them. But they stood firm, their hands clasped tightly together. The decision was made. They would stand and fight for what they had built. They would face the storm together, no matter how dangerous it became. The shelter behind them, the stone walls they had worked so hard to create, now felt like more than just a physical structure. It was a fortress, a home, and a promise. A promise that no matter the darkness that threatened them, they had something worth fighting for. And in that moment, as the first signs of dawn began to color the sky with soft hues of pink and orange, Lyra and Gareth made their stand. They weren't running anymore. They were ready to face whatever came next, together. The future was uncertain. The dangers still ahead, but for the first time they felt ready. Whatever happened, they would face it side by side. And that was enough.